Hi, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and in this video, we're going to be taking into detailed analysis the famous essay, A Bachelor's Complaint of the Behavior of Married People by Charles Lamb. Now, as we know about Charles Lamb, his famous book, The Essays of Elia and The Last Essays of Elia, these are the greatest works that have been recognized by Charles Lamb. He is also called the Prince of Essayists, the Prince of Essays, because his essays are informal, personal, and they are a perfect blend of humor and pathos. And they touch the mundane human lives of the ordinary human routines. And the way he looks at the common people in this essay is remarkable. Because this essay, as the title indicates, touches upon the behavior of the married people who, in his opinion, pretend so much, they are so hypocritical, that he at times is offended by their behavior. So, as we go on with the essay, we find humorous statements also, but we also sympathize with Lamb as a bachelor because he could not marry all his life because he was the guardian of his real sister Mary Lamb, who was a victim of mental sickness. So let's have a look at the essay. He says, as a single man, I have spent a good deal of my time in noting down the infirmities of married people, to console myself for those superior pleasures which they tell me I've lost by remaining as I am. So he admits that because he is a single man, he is a bachelor and not married, so he has spent a large amount of time in looking down, in noting, in observing the weaknesses of the people who are married. I cannot say that the quarrels of men and their wives ever made my great impression upon me, or had much tendency to strengthen me in those anti-social resolutions which I took up long ago upon more substantial considerations. What oftenest offends me at the houses of married persons where I visit is an error of quite a different description. It is that they are too loving. So he says, I cannot say that people fight, men and their wives keep quarreling or fighting, and that disturbs me or makes any impression upon me, or even that strengthens me. He says, no, what offends me is, what hurts and disturbs me is when I visit these people, they behave very differently and they pretend to show that they are too loving when actually they are not. Not too loving neither, that does not explain my meaning. Besides, why should that offend me? The very act of separating themselves from the rest of the world to have the fuller enjoyment of each other's society implies that they prefer one another to all the world. So he says, no, that is not an issue that they are loving, and that should not offend me, that should not disturb me. But the point is that they try to separate themselves from the rest of the world as if there is something very special going on, and they want to have the fuller enjoyment of the company with each other. So this way they imply, they show, they pretend that they are like preferring each other to anybody else in the world, or the world is on one side and they are one separate group. But what I complain of is that they carry this preference so undisguisedly. They perk it up in the faces of us single people so shamelessly, you cannot be in their company a moment without being made to feel, by some indirect hint or open avowal, that you are not the object of this preference. Now, there are some things which give no offense, while implied or taken for granted merely, but expressed there is much offense in them. Now, what do you mean by offense? He feels hurt, he feels disturbed. Not because these couples are loving, not because the married people are loving or they love each other. He says no offenses with that. That is not a point of disturbance. But he says what I complain of is that they carry on with this preference, this showing off that we are so loving, so undisguisedly, means so openly, They do not even feel the shame to keep it inside their houses or keep it in a little covered way, that yes, they have some kind of understanding or extreme love. But he says they perk it up in the faces of us single people. So they kind to want to thrust that love on us shamelessly so that we feel guilty or we feel ashamed in front of them that we are not the object of their preference. So this is the problem why he feels offended while he visits them. Next he says, if a man were to accost the first homely featured or plain dressed young woman of his acquaintance and tell her bluntly that she was not handsome or rich enough for him and he could not marry her, he would deserve to be kicked for his ill manners. Yet no less is implied in the fact that having access and opportunity of putting the question to her, he has never yet thought fit to do it. The young woman understands this as clearly as if it were put into words, but no reasonable young woman would think of making this the ground of a quarrel. So what is happening is that he says that if we meet a young woman who is homely looking, plainly dressed, simple looking, whom we know, acquaintance means with whom we are familiar, and tell her bluntly means openly, clearly, that she was not so good looking or so handsome or so attractive that he would marry her. So he says this was a kind of a crime that he would be doing. The young woman understands this as clearly as if it were put into words, but no reasonable young woman would think of making this the ground of a quarrel. So he says, even if you implied by your statement or word that the woman was simple, not so handsome, not so attractive, not so enticing, the woman would be ready for a fierce quarrel with him. So it was a crime to not compliment a woman for his duty, but just say or tell her that she was simple looking. Just as little right have a married couple to tell me by speeches and looks that are scarce less plain than speeches that I am not the happy man, the lady's choice. It is enough that I know I am not, and I do not want this perpetual reminding. Perpetual means constant. He says, just as nobody has the right to tell me time and again that I am plain, I am not the happy man, I am not the kind of a person who is a lady's choice, or maybe the girls won't like me, I'm not the right kind of choice. He says it's okay. It is enough that I know that I'm not that kind of a gentleman whom the ladies might like, but I do not want to be reminded each and every time I visit these couples to tell me that I'm not the lady's choice. The display of superior knowledge or riches may be made sufficiently mortifying, but these admit of a palliative. The knowledge which is brought out to insult me may accidentally improve me, and in the rich man's houses and pictures, his parks and gardens, I have a temporary usufruct at least. But the display of married happiness has nothing of these palliatives, and it is throughout pure, unrecompensed, unqualified insult. So what does he want to say here? He says the display of superior knowledge or riches may be sufficiently mortifying. These people, the married people, the couples have lots of things to display. They have the display of superior knowledge, that they know more than me, okay. They have more riches than me, okay. He says this may be satisfying for them and insulting for me. But the knowledge which is brought out to insult me also may accidentally improve me. Maybe I am benefited by this knowledge that they're trying to impose on me. Just because they are married, they try to impose their information on me and show their superiority time and again when I meet them. And in the rich man's houses and pictures, his parks and gardens, I have a temporary usufruct as at least. So he kind of feels that he has to pay something to them. It is like as if he has mortgaged something and he is like a criminal. Criminal in the sense that he is there to face their superiority, to face their attacks of knowledge, and he himself doesn't have the competence. So it is very mortifying for him, it is very embarrassing to face all this. So he says, but the display of married happiness has none of these palliatives. Display means the kind of behavior they show because of this extra knowledge that they carry because they are married. He says this has nothing of the kind of knowledge that I carry, and it is pure recompensed. Unrecompensed means the insult that I face cannot be compensated by even apologies or any other kind of behavior that they might do to cover it. So he takes it. He takes this extraordinary display of knowledge as unqualified, unrecompensed insult on himself. Next he says, marriage, by its best title, is a monopoly, and not of the least invidious sort. It is the cunning of most possessors of any exclusive privilege to keep their advantage as much out of sight as possible, that their less favoured neighbours, seeing little of the benefit, may the less be disposed to question the right. But these married monopolists thrust the most obnoxious part of their patent into our faces. Now see, here Lamb is being very sarcastic about the married people. He says this institution of marriage by its very title is like a monopoly. Now monopoly, as we know, is like ek adhikar. When you have a patent or an institution or a product which has no competitor in the market, which stands by itself, which has its own identity and superiority with which the others cannot match. So he says this marriage is actually a kind of a monopoly, and we do not have any other competitor, and it is the cunning of most possessors of any exclusive privilege to keep their advantage as much out of sight as possible. He says they know their advantages, they know they are at a benefit than the others who are bachelors, but then they cannot even hide it or keep it aside. And these married monopolists thrust the most obnoxious part of their patent into our faces. He feels so hurt while he visits his married friends. He says that these married monopolists tried to thrust the most unpleasant, obnoxious, the filthy, the unpleasant part of their product of marriage into the faces. Now this means that Lamb has to face very embarrassing, very mortifying, very painful remarks by these couples who are married. Nothing is to me more distasteful than the entire complacency and satisfaction which beam in the countenances of the new married couple, in that of the lady particularly. So he says, for me, the most distasteful, unpleasant thing is the entire complacency. Complacency means satisfaction, a sense of contentment which shows in the countenances, means the faces of the newly married couples, especially that of the ladies. They show themselves to be so contented, super satisfied, that the person who is a bachelor should feel for sure very embarrassed, very insulted, and very low in front of them. It tells you that her lot is disposed of in this world, that you can have no hopes of her. It is true I have none, nor wishes either perhaps, but this is one of those truths which ought, as I said before, to be taken for granted and not expressed. So he says it's okay, it might be true. It might be true that they may be satisfied, and I, as a bachelor, may not be happy and satisfied, but these things are to be taken for granted and should not be expressed in public like this. The excessive airs which those people give themselves, founded on the ignorance of us unmarried people, would be more offensive if they were less irrational. Now, the excessive air. Air means the attitude that you carry. Excessive means the excessively superior air. That you show that I am something, something lifted above the ground, and I am not an ordinary person. So he says these married people give themselves this superior attitude, and it is actually founded on ignorance. Ignorance of how we people live our lives, what kind of people we are. They have nothing to do with us and the knowledge that what kind of life we are living, and it becomes more offensive if they were irrational. But because they are rational being, they are intelligent people, they are sensible people, it looks very odd on their part. We will allow them to understand the mysteries belonging to their own craft better than we, who have not had the happiness to be made free of the company. But their arrogance is not content within these limits. If a single person presume to offer his opinion in their presence, though upon the most indifferent subject, he is immediately silenced as an incompetent person. So he says, if a single person means a bachelor like Lamb himself, if he presumes, if he tries or assumes to offer his own thoughts or opinions in the presence of these married people, maybe on any indifferent subject, unimportant subject, any mundane, ordinary subject, he is immediately told to be silent. Why? Because he is treated as an incompetent person because he is not married. Nay, a young married lady of my acquaintance, who the best of the jest was, had not changed her condition above a fortnight before in a question on which I had misfortune to differ from her respecting the properest mode of breeding oysters for the London market, had the assurance to ask with a sneer how such an old bachelor as I could pretend to know anything about such matters. So now this is a case that he is narrating. He says, nay, no. A young married lady whom I know of my acquaintance means whom I am familiar with. He says it comes as a joke. She had not changed her condition from unmarried to married just a fortnight before. Fortnight means 15 days, 2 weeks before. So she had got married just 2 weeks before. Before that, she was also a bachelor. She was also unmarried. But now since she is married, she questions me that how can you know something about breeding oysters for the London market since you are not married? So this kind of an attitude offends Lamb a lot. But what I have spoken of hitherto is nothing to the airs which these creatures give themselves when they come, as they generally do, to have children. So now in this passage he's going to talk about the attitude of the people, the couples who now have children. When I consider how little of a rarity children are, that every street and blind alley swarms with them, that the poorest people commonly have them in most abundance, that there are few marriages that are not blessed with at least one of these bargains, how often they turn out ill and defeat the fond hopes of their parents, taking to vicious courses, which end in poverty, disgrace, and gallows, I cannot, for my life, tell what cause for pride there can possibly be in having them. So now this has again a very important turn in the essay. He says, till now I have spoken of the couples who are married, who are newly married or who are lovingly married, but they're very proud of this fact that they are married, and they're arrogant in showing off their attitude towards each other. But he says, when it comes to people, when they have children, he says, I often think, why do these people have to carry so much attitude when I think of the fact that children are not a rarity? Every street, every blind alley means a closed street, which closes at the end. Every street swarms, is full of children, is filled with children, and that the poorest people also have children in abundance. There are just a few marriages which are not blessed with children. And how often children turn out ill. Ill means they are not good when they grow up, and they even defeat the hopes and wishes of their parents. They take to the evil courses, the illegal courses. They end in poverty, they end in disgrace, and gallows is again the illegal acts. I cannot, he says, tell what cause for pride there can possibly be in having children. So he says the people who show arrogance in front of me for having children in comparison to me living alone, he says, I do not understand the reason for this. If they were young phoenixes indeed, that were born but one in a year, there might be a pretext. But when they are so common, now this is a very important line with regard to the examination also. Lamb here says, if these children were like phoenixes. Now, phoenix is a mythical bird about which it is said that a phoenix is born once in a lifetime. It is unisexual. It lives for 500 years. It dies after 500 years, and it is reborn out of its own ashes. So he says, if we were talking about a phoenix, if these children were young phoenixes who were born once in a year, I might think that yes, there is a pretext, there is an excuse that you could be proud of the fact that you have children. But when they are so common, why are these people so proud? I do not advert to the insolent merit which they assume with their husbands on these occasions. Let them look to that. But why we, who are not their natural born subjects, should be expected to bring out spices, myrrh, and incense, our tribute and homage of admiration, I do not see. So here he is further on moving towards the offenses he has to bear. He says, I do not object to the kind of behavior these ladies have towards their husbands on certain occasions. Let them look to that. It is their problem whether they're insulting their husbands or they're talking in a different way. But he says, why we? We bachelors have nothing to take or give to these ladies who are married. We are not their natural born children or subject. Why are we expected to bring several things from the market to serve them as tributes and homage of admiration? That means, why are we expected to praise these ladies? It is the job of their husbands. They can treat their husbands the way they want, but not me. I am a bachelor. I have nothing to do with this. Like as arrows in the hand of the giant, even so are the young children. Now see, this is a quotation which is equally important in the context of this essays. He says, like, just as, now this is a simile used, just as arrows look in the hand of a giant, so are the young children in the hands of these ladies who are married and these couples. So says the excellent office in our prayer book appointed for churching of women. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. So, quiver means tarkash, in which we keep the tir kaman chalane ke liye, when we use a quiver. So he says, he uses this quotation which says, that man is happy who has his quiver full of the arrows. Which are the arrows? Arrows are the children. So he says, happy is the family which has so many children. So say I, but then don't let him discharge his quiver upon us that are weaponless. He says, I'm happy if you have lots of children. I'm happy if you have a happy family. But don't use your arrows upon people like us, bachelors like me, who are completely weaponless. Let them be arrows, but not to gall and stick us. I have generally observed that these arrows are double-headed, they have two forks to be sure to hit with one or the other. Now, this is specifically humorous. Here, we have a double layer of moods coming up in the essay. We can see the kind of pathos, we can see sadness in Lamb's words also, that he is deeply hurt by the kind of the behavior these married people show. They use their children also to hurt bachelors like Lamb. On the other hand, we have the use of humor in the essay. He says, let them be arrows, but not to gall and stick us. I've generally observed that these arrows are double-headed. So he says these children are like a fork. They are sure to hit us because they have two edges. So even if one edge doesn't hit us, the other edge is sure to hit me. As for instance, when you come into the house which is full of children, if you happen to take no notice of them, you are thinking of something else perhaps and turn a deaf ear to their innocent caresses, you are set down as untractable, morose, and a hater of children. Now, untractable means uncontrolled, morose means gloomy. So he says, this is a fork. The children are a fork. Two edges are there. Suppose you do one kind of a behavior. You come inside the house and you do not notice the children. Then you are called as gloomy, sad, a hater of children. On the other hand, if you find them more than usually engaging, if you're taken with their pretty manners and set about in earnest to romp and play with them. So he says, on the other hand, if you come inside the home and engage yourself with the children, then some pretext or other is sure to be found for sending them out of the room. They are too noisy or boisterous, or Mr. So-and-so does not like children. With these one or other of these forks, the arrow is sure to hit you. So he says either you will not be engaged with the children, then you will be called a hater of children. On the other hand, if you come inside the home and start playing with the children, on some pretext, the children will be sent to the other place saying that they are very noisy and naughty and boisterous and so things of that sort. So he says both the edges are ready when you enter a family with children. One of the edges of the forks is sure to hit you. So this was the first part of the essay, A Bachelor's Complaint. We will continue with the remaining essay in the coming videos. Thank you for now.